In the City Hall of Avalon, California, a clerk maintains 3 waiting lists. They are not for housing, or for permits to build, or for a place in a school. They are lists of people who want to own a car. The wait is roughly 25 years, and the rule that governs it is stranger than the wait itself. Before the city will issue one new residential vehicle permit, 2 existing permits must leave the island. Not 1 for 1, 2 for 1. The mechanism is not designed to manage growth. It is designed to produce subtraction. Today, about 18% of Avalon's residential properties hold a permit for a full-size car. Now hold that next to a second number. In October of 2025, 98,686 people arrived on Santa Catalina Island, the highest monthly arrival count ever recorded. Over 1 million people come every year. They spend something on the order of $166 million. Almost every job on the island exists because of them. So here is a town whose entire economy is tourism, experiencing record demand, which has written into its own municipal code a machine for shrinking itself. That is not neglect. Nobody drifts into a 2-for-1 vehicle rule. Somebody wrote it, somebody voted for it. And then the state of California passed a law making Avalon the only city in California with the legal authority to cap the number of vehicles inside its limits, which raises a question that the rest of this story exists to answer. Why would a place that lives on visitors build itself so that visitors can no longer change it? Begin about 7,000 years earlier with the people who called the island Pimu. The Tongva did something on Catalina that nobody has managed since. They lived there in the low thousands without importing their existence. And they did it by finding the one thing on the island the mainland could not get anywhere else: soapstone. Catalina's steatite quarries produced a stone soft enough to carve and dense enough to sit directly in a fire. Tongva carvers turned it into cooking bowls and commels, loaded them into plank canoes, and moved them across the channel. Soapstone from Catalina has been found across Southern California and inland for hundreds of miles. It was, in the most literal sense, an export economy. That detail matters more than it looks. The first successful business model on Catalina was based on removing something from the island and selling it to the mainland. Nothing on the island was ever going to sustain a large population by itself, because of what wasn't there. Catalina has no rivers, it has no lakes. It has 76 square miles of mountains that catch a modest amount of winter rain and then let it run into the Pacific. Everything that has ever happened on the island has happened inside that limit, whether or not anyone was paying attention to it. For most of history, nobody was. Spanish ships passed in 1542 and again in 1602, when Sebastian Vizcaíno gave it the name of a saint whose feast day was approaching. Then Europe largely forgot about it. Otter hunters stripped the coastline, smugglers used the coves, missions on the mainland pulled the Tongva off the island, and by the 1830s, the population that had understood how to live there was effectively gone. What was left was 76 square miles of unclaimed real estate, 22 miles from a coastline that was about to become the fastest growing place in America. In 1864, prospectors convinced themselves there was silver in the island's interior. The United States Army arrived and evicted them. The government wanted the island for other purposes, and those purposes evaporated within a year. The mines produced almost nothing, but the rumor did something the ore never could. It established that Catalina was a thing you could buy. It passed through owners the way a speculative asset does, including briefly the San Francisco land baron James Lick. And then in 1887, a Grand Rapids real estate developer named George Shadow bought the entire island for about $200,000. Shadow had no interest in mining. He was in the business of selling lots, and Southern California in 1887 was in the middle of a land boom so hot that towns were being invented weekly. His plan was simple: build a resort town on the island's most sheltered bay, sell parcels to Angelenos, and let the boom do the rest. His sister-in-law, Etta Whitney, gave the town its name. She took it from Tennyson, Avalon, the island where the wounded king is carried to heal. Shadow built a hotel, laid out streets, and started selling. And then the Southern California land boom collapsed, as booms do, and by 1891, he had lost the island. The failure is more instructive than a success would have been. Shadow had discovered the structural fact that would govern Catalina for the next century. The island's product was not land. It was access. A lot on Catalina was worth nothing unless someone could reliably cross 22 miles of open ocean to reach it. And Shadow did not control the boats. Whoever controlled the crossing controlled everything. The next owners understood that better than anyone alive. The Banning brothers, Hancock, William, and Joseph, were the sons of Phineas Banning, the man who had built the port at Wilmington and effectively created Los Angeles Harbor. They were not resort men, they were transportation men. They bought Catalina in 1892 and incorporated the Santa Catalina Island Company in 1894. Then they did something that shaped every decision made on the island for the next 130 years. They bought, built, or controlled all of it. The steamships that carried you across, the wharf you landed on, the hotels you slept in, the stagecoaches that took you into the interior, on roads the company graded, the glass-bottom boats that showed you the kelp forests. The tour of the island was sold by the company that owned the island and owned the ship that brought you to it. Catalina stopped being a place with businesses on it. It became a single business with a place inside it. The consequence is easy to miss and impossible to overstate. On the mainland, a town's future is decided by thousands of small competing decisions. A market. On Catalina, the future would be decided by whoever owned the company. One person's judgment, one person's taste, one person's convictions about what the island was for. For 20 years that worked. Avalon filled with tourists. The Bannings built a grand hotel, the St. Catherine, at Descanso Bay. Then on a November morning in 1915, a fire started in a lodging house in Avalon. By the time it stopped, somewhere between a third and half of the town was gone, including the Hotel Metropole. The Bannings rebuilt, and while they were rebuilding, the United States entered the First World War and restricted pleasure boating along the coast. A resort that owns its own steamship line is a formidable business. A resort that owns its own steamship line during a period when nobody is permitted to take a pleasure cruise is a set of extremely expensive liabilities. By 1919, the Bannings were selling. The buyer came over to look at it, fell for it, and then quietly bought out shareholder after shareholder until he owned control. The reported price was in the range of $3 million. William Wrigley Jr. sold chewing gum. This is the single most important fact about the next 50 years of Catalina history, and it has nothing to do with the island. Wrigley had built a fortune on a product that cost almost nothing to make and everything to advertise. He had learned earlier and more thoroughly than most men of his generation that the value of a thing lies in how completely the public has heard of it. He did not buy an island to run a profitable resort. He bought a stage, so he spent on it in ways no rational operator would. He drilled wells and built a reservoir at Middle Ranch because the island's water had already begun to define what was possible. He built a tile and pottery works to use the island's own clay. He bought the Chicago Cubs, and in 1921 began bringing them to Catalina every spring for training camp, a ritual that continued for 3 decades. Sports writers followed. Their stories carried a dateline: Avalon, Santa Catalina Island. In 1927, he offered $25,000 to the first person to swim the channel. More than 100 people entered. One finished, a 17-year-old from Toronto named George Young, who came ashore after nearly 16 hours in the water. Every newspaper in North America ran it. And in 1929, on the point at the north end of Avalon Bay, he finished the casino. 12 stories, circular, Art Deco, about $2 million. It never contained a single game of chance. Casino in Italian means gathering place. Downstairs was a theater built specifically for sound film, before most of the country had heard one. Upstairs was a ballroom that could hold 3,000 dancers, and from that ballroom, the big bands broadcast live across the country. That deserves a pause. By the mid-1930s, millions of Americans who would never cross the channel knew what Catalina sounded like on a Saturday night. Wrigley had done to the island exactly what he had done to chewing gum. He had made it famous. He had also made it something that no longer required your physical presence to exist. William Wrigley died in 1932. His son Philip inherited the island, the company, and the ball club. The peak arrived anyway. Through the 1930s, the steamer SS Catalina, the Great White Steamer, ran the channel packed to the rails. Across half a century of service, she would carry more passengers than any vessel in American history. Then in 1942, the island closed. Not slowed, closed. The military took Catalina for the duration of the war. The Coast Guard trained there. The Merchant Marine trained there. The Army Signal Corps operated there. At Toyon Bay, the Office of Strategic Services ran a training facility for the people it intended to drop behind enemy lines. Hotels became barracks. The casino became a training hall. Civilians needed clearance to be on their own island, and tourists were simply not permitted. For 4 years, a place that existed entirely to receive visitors received none. When the war ended and the island reopened, the buildings were still standing. The problem was that the customer had changed. Before the war, Catalina had a near monopoly on a specific idea: the escape from Los Angeles. It was the exotic place you could actually get to. But the men who came home in 1945 bought cars, and the freeways came, and then the airlines came, and within 15 years, an ordinary family in Southern California could reach Hawaii, or Mexico, or Las Vegas. The channel had been Catalina's moat. Now it was just an inconvenience. The irony arrived precisely on schedule. In 1958, a vocal group called the Four Preps released a song about the island 26 miles across the sea. It sold more than 1 million copies and lodged Catalina permanently in the American Songbook. That was the same year American carriers put their first jets into scheduled service. Catalina reached the peak of its fame in the exact year the technology arrived that made it unnecessary. By the 1960s, Philip Wrigley was running an island company that lost money on the last large undeveloped piece of coastal land in Southern California. Understand what that meant in that decade. Orange County was being poured. The Irvine Ranch was being converted from cattle to subdivisions. Coastline anywhere near Los Angeles had become one of the most valuable commodities in the United States. And here sat 48,000 acres of it, held by a single family, with 50-odd miles of shoreline, and a company that could not make its numbers work. Every commercial logic pointed one direction. The family commissioned studies. Planners came out and mapped the interior, including figures from the same world that was master planning Irvine. The blueprints for a developed Catalina exist. There was a version of this island with marinas in the coves and houses across the ridgelines. And it was not a fantasy, it was the obvious outcome. Philip Wrigley did something else. He was not his father. He disliked promotion, distrusted spectacle, and had spent decades listening to biologists, botanists, and ranch managers describe an island with more than 60 species of plants and animals that exist nowhere else on Earth. In 1972, he and his sister Dorothy Wrigley Auffield established the Catalina Island Conservancy, a nonprofit land trust. In 1974, the island company signed a 50-year open space agreement with Los Angeles County covering 41,000 acres. Those were preliminaries. The act itself came on February 15, 1975, when the Wrigley and Auffield families, through the Santa Catalina Island Company, deeded 135 acres of Santa Catalina Island, 88% of it, along with roughly 50 miles of coastline, to the Conservancy, in perpetuity. At the time, it was believed to be the largest transfer of its kind in California history and among the largest in the country. Here is what makes it different from a promise. A family that decides not to develop its land can change its mind. Heirs can change their minds. Estates get divided. Grandchildren need money. Boards get replaced. Philip Wrigley did not decide not to develop Catalina. He transferred the title to an organization whose charter forbids it. And in doing so, he removed the question from the hands of everyone who would come after him, including his own descendants. He did not win the argument about Catalina's future. He ended the possibility of having it. Every constraint the island lives under today descends from that deed. Once 88% of the land is permanently unbuildable, the entire future of Catalina compresses into what's left. The city of Avalon, a little under 3 square miles, of which the buildable portion is roughly 1, plus the village at Two Harbors, which has a permanent population in the low hundreds. And inside that 1 square mile, the older constraint reasserted itself: water. Catalina still has no rivers. What it has is the Middle Ranch Reservoir, a network of wells, miles of 10-inch pipe, and desalination plants at Pebbly Beach, all operated by Southern California Edison, a utility. Rationing on the island is not a policy debate, it is a number. When the reservoir drops below 600 acre-feet, Stage 1 conservation begins. Below 300, Stage 2, and residents cut consumption by a quarter. In September 2016, with the reservoir at 139 acre-feet, Stage 3 arrived, and households were ordered to cut water use by 40 to 50%. Now watch how that number becomes law. The city of Avalon adopts an annual growth policy. Attached to it is a freshwater allocation list and a waiting list for projects that have no allocation available. In late 2024, the city's position was straightforward. No new freshwater allocations would be assigned at all until Edison completed the next phase of the desalination expansion, after which an assessment would determine whether any surplus existed to give away. Read that again. Construction on Catalina does not wait for permits or financing or demand. It waits for gallons, which produces the housing situation. There is not enough of it. The waiting lists for apartments run for years. Residents commonly hold 2 or 3 jobs to stay, and vacation rentals compete for the same limited stock. The city cannot simply build its way out because affordable housing projects stand in the same waterline as everyone else. And it produces the vehicle rule from the opening, the 2-for-1, which is no longer strange at all. In a town that cannot widen a street, cannot annex land, and cannot conjure water, the only variable left to manage is quantity. There is one question left, and it is the one that turns all of this from a story about limits into an answer. Ask who actually gains when an additional person steps off the ferry. The Conservancy owns 88% of the island, and it is not a resort operator. It is a land trust, funded by donations, memberships, endowment income, and program fees, with a mission built on conservation, education, and recreation. It runs eco-tours and issues hiking permits. But its budget does not swell with visitor volume the way a hotel's does. And on the cost side, every additional person on the interior means trail erosion, waste, water draw, and fire risk. In 2007, a brush fire burned thousands of acres and came to the edge of Avalon. The organization that owns the wildlands does not experience your visit primarily as revenue. The Santa Catalina Island Company, still held by Wrigley descendants, does profit from tourists. It runs hotels, restaurants, tours, and the beach club. But it cannot build more rooms because there is no land available and no water allocated. Its supply of beds is effectively fixed. And a business with fixed supply facing rising demand does not chase volume. It raises prices. So the incentives on both sides of the island point the same way, from opposite directions. The largest landowner does not need more visitors. The largest operator cannot serve more of them. Between them, they control nearly all of Catalina. There is no longer any mechanism by which your enthusiasm becomes more Catalina. Return to the clerk in Avalon City Hall with 3 lists. The wait for a car is about 25 years, and 2 permits must leave before one arrives. There is a separate list for water, and it has been frozen pending a desalination plant. There is an unofficial one for housing, measured in years. Meanwhile, the arrival counts keep setting records. 98,786 in a single month, more than 1 million a year. Cruise ships tendering passengers into the bay 13 times in a March. Those 2 facts are not in tension. They are the same fact, seen from opposite ends of a chain that took 140 years to fall. An island with no rivers. A speculator who discovered its product was access, not land. Shipping men who made the entire island one company, so that one man's judgment could decide its fate. A gum manufacturer who used that power to make Catalina famous, and in doing so built a demand the island's water could never physically serve. A war that proved the place could survive 4 years with no visitors at all. A jet age that stripped away its monopoly on escape in the same year a pop song made it immortal. And a quiet heir who looked at the most valuable undeveloped coastline in California and gave away the right to ever develop it, not as a policy, but as a deed in perpetuity in 1975. Every one of those people was solving a different problem. None of them was designing the island that exists now. William Wrigley spent a fortune making the world want to come to Catalina. His son made certain that wanting could never change it. Both of them succeeded completely. The ferries still run. The casino still stands on the point. The ticket is still for sale. It simply no longer matters to the island whether you buy one.